Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I am your host, Robert Stanley. Today we have an open and candid conversation with Robert L. White. He wants to explain to us why morality comes from God, and I intend to explain why he's wrong. Here we go.
It's the Right to Reason podcast.
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
Robert L. White, how are you, sir?
I'm doing quite well, other Robert. How are you?
Yeah, two Roberts don't make a right. That's the rule. Everybody can find Robert L. White at robertlwhite.net. That's a blog where he has a whole bunch of Christian apologetics and lots of other topics, right?
Yeah, I hesitate to use the term apologist. I do have some, the biggest thing that's like that on my blog right now would be, I did a series a while back of just going through like the God delusion and kind of giving thoughts on it. I get really into epistemology at a practical level. And I have been called the common sense epistemologist before. That used to be like my Twitter handle. But one of the reasons I like common sense epistemology is because it applies to all areas of our life. And not to jump into a crazy different topic right off the bat, but like even everything to do with politics, we're both in the US, and vaccines and all of these things really have to do with a pretty practical epistemology. Like who do we trust? How much does authority play into that? How much expertise do we need in specific fields? And when you're talking about religion, there are hundreds of fields it can feel like that you would need expertise in if you really wanted to, get down to the bottom of things. But none of us have that much time. And so that became a topic in itself, this sort of meta thing of this practical epistemology of how do I navigate life with all these complex fields that I want to figure out what I think about. But, there's only limited time and I have a limited intellect, and how do I use that? And so a lot of my blog is about that. So like I have a podcast as well. You can just search for Robert L. White for that. And like some of the topics I like to talk about is like heuristics. That's something we rarely talk about because it's less hard and fast. It's less formulaic. But we actually use heuristics all the time. And so maybe we should talk about that and figure out proper ways to use heuristics and improper ways. Also the place of like intuition. And then I do, I don't hide my hand too much. I am a Christian and I want to engage with skeptics and also like doubting Christians. And so I then, at times apply these general principles to my Christian faith, to atheism, to whatever. And try to move that conversation along a little bit.
I saw on your blog that you had a review of Peter Boghossian's. What was the name of it? I actually have the book here on my bookshelf. It was like
Manual for Creating Atheists.
Manual for Creating Atheists. You were also talking about street epistemology in another blog. It was actually Anthony Magnabosco that sent me that book, Boghossian's book.
Oh, right.
So I've got a lot of enjoyment out of it. But you had a different take, I see. Like you thought maybe there were some errors there?
Yeah. I overall really enjoyed that book, and I have to be on the same side ultimately because it's about using good epistemology, like learning to have better epistemology to come to truer beliefs. And so overall, like I'm on his team actually. And I'm proud of that review because I tried to be very fair and also figure out what does bother me about street epistemology, because there is a layer that does really bother me that I think it just misses. It's not straight out incorrect or anything, but I think it misses a key part of figuring out those true beliefs. And so I think it's one of the top reviews on Amazon, or like you said, it's on my blog too.
What does it miss exactly?
Yeah, sure. So there's a couple different things that, and part of it has to do with the individual practitioner for sure. But probably the two things, and I did have some other complaints about just some of the things he says in the book, but that's a little different. But as far as the general practice, probably the two main things is it tends to ignore abductive reasoning, number one. In other words, it's all focused on the offense against a currently held view rather than trying to give an alternative explanation. And anytime you're trying to explain complex phenomenon, it's going to be easier to attack an explanation than it is to give a better alternative explanation. So if you're trying to give a theory for particle physics or something, it's always going to be easier to poke holes in that than to give an alternative explanation. But the thing is, abductive reasoning is arguably the most important way we navigate life, is trying to give the best explanation for everything that we see around us. And so I think it becomes a little myopic because it's not weighing different explanations, and instead it's just trying to poke holes in a single explanation, which for anything complex, you're going to be able to do to some degree. Now, that's still a worthy enterprise, and it does. I mean, that is part of the Socratic method, and I think that's great. But we just need to recognize that it's not the whole story, and it can instill doubt into a view that might actually be the best view, but simply because you're not looking at the alternative explanations, it just it can give a little bit of a false impression that, oh, I'm an idiot for holding this view just because some potential holes are poked into it, even though it could still be the best explanation we have. And just the other thing is the way it's such a flow chart of what is your strongest reason for believing X. And so they pick that one. And then you do this flow chart of okay, so you believe X, but what if I change this one variable? Would you still believe X? And it's definitely interesting, but it becomes kind of this scalpel method of trying to form a very tight deductive argument for a big idea, like do aliens exist or something. And a lot of complex phenomenon and complex beliefs we really believe because of a wide variety of data, not a single deductive case.
Yeah.
But street epistemology kind of forces the person to focus on it like a single line of evidence and then poke holes in it. And once again, it's a scalpel. It's an epistemological scalpel, and we need to try that. But it tends to, in my mind, it can be a little deceptive that it implies that this is the way we reason, is this single deductive thing. When I would prefer, when I'm questioning someone about a belief, I think it can almost be better to do a sort of mutual steel manning and try to help the person think of the broader reasons they believe something and talk about it broadly rather than get so specific always. You need to get specific. I just think you need all of the above. You need to get really specific, really deductive, and you need to zoom out sometimes and see what other reasons. Is it a cumulative thing? Is it an example you could use is why do you think your wife loves you or something? And they say, or what is the strongest reason you think your wife loves you?
That's because they wouldn't ask why do you think, they would, what is the strongest reason?
And so
but there might be a million of them and it lacks nuance.
And then you put holes in it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I think I got you figured out, man. So you're digging epistemology, abductive reasoning, heuristics. I bet you're the apologist that says, I'm going on a limb here, so correct me if I'm wrong. You're the one that says God seems to be, or at least you'll go with the vague, the creator seems to be the best explanation. You as the agnostic, me, right? You don't have another suggestion, so this is probably the best way to go because it's the easiest one available to us. And you can poke holes in my argument, but ultimately this is the most likely conclusion that we could reach. Do you go somewhere in that direction?
Similar. I wouldn't phrase it exactly the way. The way I think I would phrase it.
You probably phrase it better than I did.
No, I mean, that was pretty fair. I think the way I would phrase it is I like talking about in terms of trying on different lenses to see what fits best for reality, which is really just another way of saying abductive reasoning. And I think with the data I personally have, and because I think very epistemologically, I can't escape my own brain.
Mm-hmm.
I can't zoom out to the cosmos. Literally, I'm stuck inside my own head. So with all the data I've been able to take in, the lens that makes the most sense to me is Christianity. overall. And I do take a sort of a light form of Pascal's wager in the sense of, the days I'm like not sure about it, it has been, practically speaking, a worthwhile endeavor for my life to pursue this. I don't even resort that much to like, the afterlife and avoiding hell and stuff like that. I'm just saying, like, when, let's say I have a moment of doubt, then kind of practically speaking, I think there's value in, basing your life around a self-sacrificial act. Like that's being the cornerstone of my worldview, is a self-sacrificial act. I think that's worthwhile. But I do think ultimately, with the data I have, it is the lens that makes the most sense of total reality.
All right, so let's dig in, brother. Let's do some steel manning. So
yeah, sure.
I come from that annoying atheist or agnostic atheist atheism argument, but in fact, I do actively believe there's no God.
Okay.
So, but you guys kind of force us into a hole where we have to make that argument, I feel like, because if you refuse to accept the burden of proof, we got nothing, because, that whole, you can't prove a negative. And in this case, in the case of, is there a horse in the room? No, there's no horse in my room, but right. In the case of your God, like, no, we can't prove the negative. So you force us to force you to take that burden of proof. But either way, that's not really, I don't think it's necessarily genuine. That's not really what most atheists think. They'll say they do, but they really do, like, believe there's no God. You know what I mean? It's not just that they like so that would be where I come from. And reasons for that belief is that, for one, if you keep ripping me off, what did George W. Bush say? Fool me once, shame on you. You fool me, can't get fooled again. That's what that was.
Right.
But what he was trying to say there is, you keep seeing a blue house over and over as you're driving through a neighborhood, and you take a turn. It's not irrational to predict another blue house. It's not crazy. It's not necessarily a fact that it won't be a red house, of course. But every time a God is presented, it turns out to just be awful. It's got nothing but logical fallacies wrapped up in contradictions about the very being of God, I mean, not just like silly stuff like, could he create a rock too heavy to lift, or make a hot pepper too spicy to eat, or, something silly, but like real contradictions that they just make no sense. And then little plot hole fillers that, like, it's so obvious that the dudes, just regular dudes in the Middle East that wrote this book, they didn't really think it all the way through, because they're just dudes. They're not as smart as you and I, So, like, they write this, and then later on, people fill things for them, like the concepts of the Trinity, the rapture, end times, original sin. Sometimes Jesus was just a dude, and we're all sons of God. And then sometimes Jesus was the real son of God, and we needed Council of Nicaea to help us figure that one out. And like it's always something that gets fixed later on. And it's not just with your God. It's every one of them that I look at. So that's a big reason for me. But is that something that you would say is at least a rational approach, or would you say, Robert, that's the dumbest shit I ever heard?
No, I think it's extremely rational as a starting point. Like you're doing brush clearing, kind of, and
sure.
It's what we all need to do, and it's what we all do as we grow up, and we start realizing that some people very sincerely believe ridiculous things, and some of the stuff we were taught is almost surely ridiculous as well, and so I think that's that initial brush clearing. The way I would frame it is a lot of what you're talking about is a bit of a top-down approach of talking about these ultimates of like God's properties and these grand ideas. I've become a very bottom-up approach of like, let's go to data in the world and what is the best explanation of that data. And not even talking Jesus is the best explanation of that data, like one step at a time, kind of. And let me go back to the Lactheist thing. I'm sympathetic to the Lactheists, actually, because I do agree. Are you familiar with Bertrand Russell's teapot?
Sure.
By any chance? Yeah. So I'm very sympathetic to that. Like, if we are taking shots in the dark of what is out beyond the universe, there are shots in the dark, and there's no reason to believe a a purple rock monster exists, beyond the known universe. Like, it's possible, but I think Occam's razor does away with that extremely well. Like, it truly is the most random shot in the dark, and it's theoretically possible or logically possible, I guess. But it's so insanely small chance as a shot at the dark. So that's where I'm on the same page as a lack theist. Where I'm not is once you change the discussion, and I think the discussion becomes much more productive when you do this, when you change the discussion to be about explanations for data, then things can start getting on track, because that's what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to randomly say, is there a God? Is there a flying spaghetti monster? That is coming at it from the wrong way. That's coming at it from, we all already have these concepts, and now we're kind of coming around back. It all started with explanations for data. And so I would prefer to go back there. So like, and it is a worthwhile question of, do some things even need an explanation, like the existence of the universe? But at least intuitively, the whole reason we're doing this is to try to find explanations for things. I mean, that's the whole enterprise of science, and everything is, in general, we want to find explanations, right?
Do you mean kind of like when I walk outside and it's just a beautiful day and I see a sunrise and I feel this very intrinsic need to thank something or someone because it's just goddamn beautiful, And it's and I think, where the hell did that come from? That's incredible. Somebody painted this portrait, and it almost feels like they painted it just for me. And in that moment, at least, is that kind of what you mean by like start from the bottom up, where we're just looking at creation itself and probably the good parts of it, ignoring the bad parts of the random chaos, the cold, evil space.
I would say definitely not ignoring the bad parts.
Okay, but you would would you say I'm close at least?
I mean, I would just say that that example is a rather weak one, as far as many people intuitively don't even think we need much of an explanation for the example you just gave. However, intuitively, I would say most people by default want to explain where the solar system came from, let's say. Like, not even the universe. Like, we just naturally, like, how did, the Earth is going around the sun. How did this get started? It seems to have been doing this a while. And then we found an explanation for it, of like the formation of the solar system and the Big Bang. So, I mean, this is just the whole enterprise of a huge part of just human life, is to discover patterns, and when possible, discover explanations. And I mean, in our experience, it's almost always possible to find an explanation. In fact, it would be the tiniest sliver of a percentage of things that we would literally say there's no explanation for. And that becomes very debatable, of like all of existence, for instance, like the known universe. So that's what I'm talking about. And so just to give some examples of, like, first of all, does the universe need an explanation? Does morality need an explanation? Does consciousness need an explanation? Do all these supernatural stories need an explanation? And I would say for almost all of those, I would say, with maybe the exception of the known universe, I think almost all of those we would say, they do need an explanation. But the materialists and the atheists think the explanation is different than the Christian does. And so, I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah. It might even be better to say the Christian claims to have an explanation, where a lot of non-believers just say, hell, Rob, I don't know. I feel like that's a little more humble, but if your explanation is valid, it's worth entertaining. I'm just worried, I'm worried, like with my sunrise analogy, fair that a lot of people might say that they can explain the sunrise, but we didn't used to at one point, right? Ooga Booga walks out of the cave and sees that. He's thinking that very basic kind of thought, right? And then throughout all of human history, there's a million examples where somehow the sun is related to some kind of ethereal plane or heaven. I mean, even your own Christ ascended up, right? Into the clouds. Right. Where did he go? Like he didn't. He went to he went to heaven, right? Because that's the firmament. We always hear that referenced a lot. Heaven's really bright. Well, I wonder why. The sun's up there, and heaven must be up too. And there's very basic concepts. All the gods were always the results of shapes that we could figure out in stars. You see 3 dots, and you go, "That's a belt." I don't know why, but we would. Everything was always like that. And then as we learned more and more and more, we started figuring out that there are explanations for these things. But then once we get here, 2021, Robert L. White says that stuff we can explain, but these other concepts that we have yet to figure out yet, that one's probably has a God explanation. I feel like maybe I'm straw manning you, but I think you're kind of leading us into a God of the gaps.
Yeah, I would. Well, first of all, your example of the, walking out in Orion's belt or whatever. I mean, that's why I love epistemology. Like, that's why we've come so far to realize that sort of thinking leads to plenty of false beliefs when you have an epistemology that's shaped like that. And, obviously the advent of science and all that sort of stuff. So first of all, like the idea of you could take really either morality or consciousness. Like, let's take morality for a second. I mean, a lot of very serious atheist philosophers take that question very serious about where does morality come from. Now, it's fine to say, and I agree, like, I mean, I don't know should be the default, I don't know where morality comes from, but we would like to know, and it has major implications for law and meaning of where that morality comes from. And maybe we still end up with that. I don't know. I'm not saying we don't. And I certainly, and this is where I don't think I'm God of the gaps, is I don't think we should default to a kind of facile explanation until we get something better.
You don't just go to God for everything. I mean, I guess ultimately you would see him as the ultimate creator. So technically you don't have a choice, but you don't necessarily go to him for like just every small problem that comes up. Where'd coronavirus come from? God. Where'd the cure come from? That's God. It's a little more complex than that for you. I see that.
Yeah. So,
what is the explanation for morality, if you don't mind?
Yeah, and morality, this is one I still want to think through more. Like, it is very hard to parse morality because it's a great example of something we can't escape our own minds, and it's so deep within us, a moral compass. Once again, I like to think in terms of this kind of very bottom-up thing of, I don't know exactly how it works. Like, I'm not trying to say in some very direct terms that morality is grounded in God's nature, like that might be true or whatever. The way I look at it is our sense of morality, this is the way I build the argument, is with morality, we have different levels of the kind of, I like to use the term like the sphere of transcendence of a certain rule. Like, where does this rule hold? So like when two siblings are growing up in a room together and they draw a line down the middle and say, you can't cross over into my side, that is a rule made up in a very limited circumstance. And if the parent walks in and crosses a line, no one thinks anything because they know the rule was made just for them. And so it doesn't conflict with their intuition that this rule only fits for them. Now you zoom out a little bit more and we make some sort of like, intellectual property law or something like that. And once again, the rule is now much bigger. The sphere of transcendence is much larger now. And it affects, all of people creating products in the US or something.
Hold on, Rob, real quick. I hate to cut you off. This is you answering, where does morality come from? Like, I'm not trying to be a smartass or a dick or anything, but I'm just like, I'm just struggling to.
Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm trying to describe how morality seems to work and then why I think the Christian view of the universe makes more sense with it.
Okay.
So
cool.
First, I'm just trying to describe how morality works. So we have these natural spheres of where these rules hold. And when we step outside of it, it doesn't bother our intuition. So when someone doesn't obey U.S. copyright law because they're in another country, that doesn't intuitively bother us because they're not in the US. We know that the rules are different. So my point is, when it comes to our actual morality, our base morality about murder and rape and suffering, things change here, because from a kind of atheistic evolutionary standpoint, it seems like that sphere of transcendence, that sphere where it holds, would be like the human race. And yet we don't treat it that way. If an alien race visited us and were otherwise moral, but practiced eugenics, or sometimes raped their females to create more offspring when they needed to, or something, that we wouldn't be able to just say, oh, well, our morality, that sphere of transcendence, is just to humans. That would actually really bother us, I think, intuitively. In fact, sci-fi TV shows actually portray this. Like, I recently saw in a sci-fi show where an alien culture visited, and the humans were like judging the aliens, saying, how dare you do this? And it was funny to me because it's like we can't escape the feeling that morality goes beyond the human race, essentially. In other words, morality intuitively feels cosmic. And yet, if we take the reductionist view, which seems the most logical in atheism, morality is not cosmic. It probably is just limited to the human mind as it has evolved. And that might be right. It might be right that we just have this delusion that for some reason, morality evolved to delude us to thinking it has kind of a cosmic meaning that goes beyond the human race, when it doesn't. That might be right. But now when we talk about different lenses of reality, the Christian worldview does make sense of that intuition. The Christian worldview does say it's cosmic. The Christian worldview pushes the sphere of transcendence all the way out to include God himself, to where literally every inch of reality, that morality does hold. And so that fits with my intuition better. Now, once again, maybe my intuition is wrong, but that is a nugget that I put in my pocket of something that aligns more with the Christian worldview. And then you go and look in other areas. And if that was the only thing, like if I were in your shoes, Robert, and I felt like I had all these reasons to disbelieve Christianity, and all these reasons to think that everything can be fundamentally explained otherwise, then that would just be one weird thing. And I would say, well, probably we are deluded, and our morality compass is programmed us to believe something that's not really true. It would be one thing. And so that's where I do think it is this cumulative thing of, when you add it all together and try on the lenses again and again, at some point the scale tips to where it's like too many things fit the lens better on the Christian side.
You're saying a major reason, I won't Anthony Magnabosky you and say it has to be one thing. A major reason that you believe morality comes from God is because it's universal, would be a way to summarize that very long walk you took me on.
Yeah, sorry about that.
With the bottom up thing, I get your strategy. It's the bottom up.
Yeah.
It's just the bottom up way of doing things. I feel like is, and I'm not saying this about you. I'm saying about the argument. Yeah. I think it's a cowardly way to go. And the reason I say that is because if you just make a statement, like if I say the Christian God is a moral monster, and here's my reasons to defend it, I've already shown you my hand. You know what I mean? I've already placed my bet. Even everything's on the table, and you can criticize it and review each point that I make. You know what I mean? But whenever you start at the bottom and you say, let's analyze this at 0.0001 and start walking away, it's almost like you're leading me in the path that your mind's thinking. You know what I mean? Like it's this.
But that's precisely what I'm trying to do, because I'm trying to explain why I believe, what makes sense, what is to me I'm trying to explain the reasons.
But nobody cares what each other thinks. They want to know what's true and why they should think it.
Yes, but I'm trying to give, everything I said didn't have to do with me personally, besides appealing to a general intuition. So I'm trying to give reason. Okay, if I had simply said, oh, I think morality is grounded in God's nature. First, it's like, wait, what does that even mean? Is it grounded?
That's fair.
And then the Euthyphro dilemma. And this is the other thing, that the sentence, morality is grounded in God's nature, isn't the reason I think morality points to
Right.
God. The reason
No,
I think morality points to
right.
God is the thing I just walked you through. So that is my argument. I'm not trying to.
Very fair.
Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. That's so funny because you're right. If you once you say it the way that I want you to say it, I'm like, God's nature. What the hell is that? It's
right.
That's fair. I look at it more like morality can be explained from a multifaceted perspective, right? So you've got definitely evolution because we can see moral acts. Now, when we say moral, we're talking about a very rudimentary kind of good and bad in this sense, right? We're not talking about like, is it unethical to steal a movie, off of a torrent or something? You know what I mean? But we're just very basic stuff. Hurting someone else from your own tribe or species or family, those things seem bad, right? So we see that in animals. We see compassion, we see affection, and we can look at our evolutionary development and see how different people in the past that couldn't have taken care of themselves still lived to old age, because we found out they had like some kind of major bone problem, but obviously the society helped them survive. So there's empathy. We can look at it neurologically and understand that when you wince in pain, I feel something because of mirror neurons. All of our emotions we can map out in the brain. If I vomit and it causes you a need to vomit, that's your amygdala talking to you.
Right.
You and I could probably go back and forth with just different fascinating parts about the brain that explain each thing that you would say, well, that's an emotion. Yeah, but that emotion leads us to create certain behaviors that over time create a hierarchical structure of ethics that we then use. And we expound on that to laws and even just kind of social customs. Like, that was taboo, the thing that you did. You had your elbows on the table, and it expands from there. But it doesn't seem to me to need a God to explain it. And I don't need a God or his nature.
Yeah, I think that is doable. I think
that was my bottom up. I did a bottom up version.
Yeah, no, that was great.
I liked it. I hated it first, and then I liked it, so I wanted to try it too. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, and
just trying it on.
What I want people to do is really, and this is where I'm really on board with the goal of street epistemology is like, why do you really believe? Why do you really believe morality has this alternative explanation? And you just gave me a great answer, and that's great, rather than just giving me a soundbite of, like that. I think that's why you, Robert Stanley, think morality is explained in this other way. And I think it's reasonable to say what you did. I think it still butts heads with our intuition when we get down to some of the most atrocious acts. And when we consider the possibility that this is sort of simply evolutionary programming, and from a cosmic perspective, this torturing of a child or whatever isn't, really wrong. It's wrong the same way it's wrong for a worker bee not to serve his queen, which is, once again, the sphere of like holding for that is very tiny. It's the beehive.
So your reason for believing in morality is because it's universal. And then whenever I show a non-universal sense of morality, and by universal, I don't mean like the cosmic spectrum. I mean like ultimately, colloquially, universal, but like for you, whenever I present, look here, we don't need God in any of these spots. You say, yeah, but what about that universal one? You see, like it's like for you, morality is defined that way. And
I think our intuition strongly makes morality feel that way. And maybe our intuition is a delusion, but I think our intuition tells us that morality, when someone is torturing my child or whatever, that is wrong on this bigger level than just human evolutionary function.
Yes.
Do you agree that our intuition
agree
makes us feel that way?
100%. And I think that can also be explained. And not just because it's evolutionary. I'm sure intuitively, my dog really thinks it's wrong, whenever he's chasing it. He's really mad at his tail in that moment. He's going in a circle. I'm sure like intuitively, a cat really feels like its bowl is empty whenever it can just see the bottom of it. So, they're stupid, and so are we in the same way. However, I think there is an explanation even beyond just, well, yeah, that's our limitation. We don't understand the bigger picture, so it's not intuitive. I think that there is such a thing as objective morality. It's just not objective in the way that I think you would define it. I think when you define something objective, I think you also incorporate God into that definition. Perhaps I might be once again strawmanning you there, but something similar to that, I'm sure I'm close to in your case. And what I would say objective morality is, it is either objectively for the best or not. Is it, the very cliched argument I'm sure you're tired of hearing, but, does it promote human flourishing? Right. Does it cause pain and suffering? Also, there's some pragmatism that has to be factored in here. Going to the dentist obviously hurts my son, but it's for the best. The consequentialism has to have a factor there, but you can't take it so far as to say, do you want to live in a society where everyone with 2 kidneys has to sacrifice 1 kidney to someone without 1 kidney? Right. So it gets complicated, but I think it's just ultimately, if we have to ask ourselves what morality is. And if, once again, you define morality as something that comes from God or requires an objective creator, an objective lawgiver, then by definition, you're only going to prove yourself right whenever you say it comes from God. But if you define morality as a little more complicated, I think, the way that I'm presenting it, where there's the simple, evolutionary morality, there's the sociological one, and then there's this philosophical one that is objective, but is based on what we would probably consider, at least agree, good and bad things to be. That which is ethical is to be, and thus making the right choices for conscious beings. I feel like you were doing the same thing earlier, where it has to be universal, because within what you mean by the word moral is universal. And if maybe what you're doing right now, once again, correct me if I'm wrong, in what you mean by moral now is that it comes from a lawgiver, in that objective sense. Once again, I think there's a pattern developing where you might just be putting your definition into the word itself.
I think where I might get off the train from what you're saying is, and maybe I can put this question back to you, is it plausible that an alien race could visit us and in general seem to have our same moral sensibilities, but seem to have a very functioning society, even though they do something that seems morally wrong to us, like eugenics, for instance, but they seem to be flourishing. Like, what do we do then? Is our moral intuition wrong? Or do we just have different moral intuitions and they evolve differently?
Yeah, that would be a conundrum for the time, like in the future. Right. That would definitely be an interesting one where we say, how far Kant do we want to go and how far John Stuart Mill do we want to go? Clearly these aliens are cunts, but do we want
because if that's true that we should, respect the aliens' culture, then that has major implications for human societies and interacting with different human cultures, because how do we know they haven't kind of evolved a little differently? So my point
but we'd have to figure it out. Nobody would tell us.
Right. But many people, their default is that there is a more absolute right and wrong, and once I figure it out, we need to force this other society to do it because they're being wrong. But my point is, I guess you're saying that there will be some calculus you could use to figure out the right answer.
Just like we're doing now. I mean, we're like you said, people are very sure about things, but we have that argument in abortion right now. As a perfect example, the state I live in just passed a law. They call it the heartbeat law.
Right.
If you bring up the question, well, what about once a baby's viable, but it hasn't crossed the womb, out of the womb yet, as it breathes its first breath of air, is it okay to kill it at that point? It's completely hypothetical, but but it's
well, Peter Singer, you're familiar with his take on that, I'm guessing.
Yeah, was it a pig or an elephant or something like that has more right?
I'm mostly thinking where he says it like it's not unreasonable. I think that you could kill a 3-month-old baby. I think if it's maybe disabled or something like. He goes to a kind of extreme version of like kind of abortion.
Same theme. Yeah, the what I was recalling was that he was comparing it to even an animal that can fully experience pain and suffering would be more unethical to hurt that animal than a baby that can't, or a fetus or whatever. But so we're on the same track. Obviously, there's lots of different perspectives on morality. We come to these conclusions as a society over time, and from trying to experience the other person's perspective. There's valuable tools that we can use, like Rawls' veil of ignorance, for example, where, as I'm sure you're aware, but you can stand back and say, well, what made me this certain way? And was I in control of those things. So I was born poor. So the way for us to remove a certain sense of inequality in the universe would be if everyone was born at the same financial level, right? And then just we can start to recognize privilege through those kinds of perspectives, start to understand others through empathy and through communicating with them, and then pass laws to enforce these things and adjust them through criminal justice. And eventually we arrive at what seems to be the best solution that we can do at the time. And sometimes we fail, and we fail for centuries, and then we autocorrect and self-correct. We don't really make these choices based on books that were written in the past. That's at least where we started. I can give you that. Like the Ten Commandments was a great starter,
Sure.
But we don't follow it today. How much of the Ten Commandments do you really follow today?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we're getting a little off track and that gets into more epistemology, of like how do we know which things are, and I don't think, it's all based on the Bible. I mean, I'm a strong believer in that, if morality comes from God, then it comes written on our hearts, and, we're figuring out, so the atheist has access to that as well, so, and I hear what you're saying about, figuring out as a society. It is a very fascinating topic. And one of the reasons it's fascinating is, like I said before, we can't really fully escape.
Are you under arrest, Robert? The cops are chasing you.
Oh, can you hear that?
Or you're playing GTA 5.
Guys, I gotta get out real quick. I just finished a job. They
found you.
Yeah, we can wait a second.
In your spare time, between bank heists, you like to do a little epistemology.
Yeah, exactly.
With your atheist buddies.
Yeah, no, it's fine. Because one of the most fascinating parts of The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins is how he shows this slow but inevitable progress of morality that is really fascinating, and how we there's differences in cultures, but there has been this overall moving in a certain direction. It's one of my favorite parts of the book. And so it is a really fascinating thing because there's so clearly differences among cultures morally, but and yet also certain universals, of like needlessly torturing a conscious being, so yeah, it is a very fascinating topic, and it's hard to get outside of our heads about it. And I'm sympathetic to some consequentialist things. I do think sometimes we can pretend it's not as much coming from our intuition as it is. That I think I'm not sold on the idea that it's simply starting with the idea of conscious flourishing of conscious agents, and then we just work it out from there, consequentialist logic. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if that will work, and if it will work, then what do you do when an alien culture has worked it out with a different way, doing something that seems pretty horrible to us? And maybe you're right. Maybe we then need to upgrade our morality and get used to this uncomfortable thing they're doing, but I think it requires more thought overall. And I mean, there's a lot of work going on here in philosophy, obviously. But I still feel like there is that deep moral sense that some of these things are kind of cosmic fundamentals about suffering. And even if you just take the idea of flourishing of conscious agents, of course we all intuitively agree that's good, and we can just go home after deciding that. But it bothers me a little bit if I were an atheist of how deep-seated that feeling is, and how it has a special category we put called morality that feel this deep sense of right and wrong that goes beyond simply, this is what we're here to do, is to propagate a species.
It's not a comfortable feeling. I'll give you that. Because I do feel that same intuitive thing that you do. And I think when atheists talk to believers, it's almost like they cut off that part of their brain, or they shut it down while they're talking, and they take on this character of what the atheist is supposed to be, and they pretend like we're so different. I don't feel the same human things you do. And then they almost gaslight you, right? Where it's like, oh, really? No, I feel totally fine with death. No, it's going to be like just before I was born. No, I'm not afraid of that at all. Bullshit. You're playing a character, the atheist character, which, by the way, comes off douchey. It doesn't work. But yeah, I'm with you. I'll tell you what bothers me more than why does it feel intuitively universal, even though, cognitively I can rationalize out that this is ultimately insignificant, right? What bothers me worse than that is that it's ultimately insignificant. That one drives me nuts. That everything I care about doesn't have greater meaning than just me and the people in my life. You know what I mean?
So that does bother you?
Oh God, yes. It's very frustrating. I constantly live in this. How would you describe it? It's like existential angst with atheism, wow. And it's not just with atheism. I would say with nihilism, because I think that's a natural direction to go, and to follow that up with, I'm just going to throw out a million isms. Sorry, but absurdism seems to be the best result of that I've found. Which once again, I'm sure you're familiar, but it's just basically that there is no ultimate meaning to anything, and the joy in life is playing the game regardless. Right. And I'll be honest with you, I do find that ultimately unsatisfying because of my intuitive nature.
And first of all, I appreciate that honesty, and it does seem like some atheists don't experience that, which is very impressive to me. It's like,
they're
how did you get there?
They're liars.
Or
they haven't even thought about it. Like, think about those people that they look at a beautiful abstract painting or something, and they're just like, the hell is that? It looks like a monkey made it. My kid can paint better than that. I think some atheists, to some degree, are looking at the beauty of life and choosing to be that redneck impression I just did. They're just not thinking about it. But I think the ones that came out of religion, or the ones that didn't have to come out of religion, but they still have that depth to them, the almost a spiritual sense, a transcendent sense. Right. And by those words, obviously, I don't mean the way that you would mean them, but the colloquial way that we could both maybe find common ground with. I think those atheists, they do feel what I'm describing. They're just afraid to say it because you guys are relentless. Jesus. As soon as we...
It's true.
As soon as we give you an inch, you take a mile with it, and then you're like, you got your hands on us and you're praying over us. It's crazy. You're taking people's rights away. We got to sing songs to your God. Give us a break.
The Christian can be the douchebag as well. It must be said. I'm with you on that. And one of my projects, and one of the reasons I don't just go out there as an apologist, one reason I don't do that is because there's plenty of other people doing that. But another reason is, part of my project is to move the conversation forward to where the Christian can give an inch and the atheist can give an inch. Let's be honest, where the weaknesses in our worldviews are, where the things that bother us, and have more honest conversations and maybe make some progress there. And with what you just said, first of all, that could sum up my argument a little bit. Like you just said, transcendence and spirituality. And I would say, morality seems to have this innate sense of a transcendence to it. And from my best understanding of kind of a nihilistic view that I also agree would be the most logical on atheism, it doesn't really have that transcendence, and neither does like the meaning and stuff like what you're talking about. And it might very well be the case that that's simply the truth, that there isn't a transcendence to it. But that means part of our intuition is a little bit wrong, probably. And to me, that begs a little bit of an explanation. Like, why did our intuition go wrong? Why are we so bothered by the lack of actual transcendence once we think about it,
intuition sucks.
Yeah. I see. That's where I disagree. I think we need to, what's the right word? Leverage intuition properly. And we need to sorry, there's a freaking ambulance going by now.
Well, hopefully somebody went to heaven rather than the reality that I'm predicting they just ceased to exist. And but anyway, I have enjoyed the conversation, and what my favorite part of this whole thing, I'm guessing your favorite part is when I shared that there is a negative, miserable side to believing there's just nothing, no purpose. Sure. But the part that I really enjoyed was whenever you did this very laborious explanation, and I just was very honest with you and candid, and just said,
"Called me a coward."
Well, no, I did not call you a coward. I said the approach was cowardly, but where I said that was a really long and boring explanation. I don't like it. Yeah, and then I said it was cowardly, and then you said, well, I could just say it the way that everybody else does. And I'm like, no, that's worse. You're right.
I did appreciate
you turned me around on that one. I'll give you that.
And just to sum up, to not leave this off the table, like the whole thing with morality, even if you get on board with what I said, most people would be like, well, that sounds pretty weak. And I would say, yeah, it is pretty weak, but it's if you look at a lot of different areas and they all add up to the lens of, let's say, Christianity, they all line up better that way. Then all of a sudden that kind of comes together in a stronger way. And just to give one other quick example without, defending it, is consciousness. Like I take a very Thomas Nagel approach of a kind of bottom up thing. His book, Mind and Cosmos, is fantastic, where he's not trying to come up with some grand scheme of what consciousness is. I mean, he tries to give an explanation near the end, I think, but his main point is that consciousness doesn't fit into the materialist scheme. And so what does that mean? And I think a similar thing, and I think it fits better on like a theistic worldview. And then you could do that with other stuff, supernatural phenomenon, the resurrection. And so I just want to be clear that I don't sit at home thinking, I could be an atheist, but that one morality thing has got me. It's like we've all lived. I've lived here 30 plus years, and I've thought about a lot of different areas. And it's when you add them all together that for me, and it would take, many hours of debating each thing, for me, more of them line up with a theistic and a Christian lens than not. So that did that answer your question of why I believe, Robert?
Yeah, I think you answered it quite thoroughly. I enjoyed it. Everybody can find more of Robert L. White at robertlwhite.net. And you said you got a podcast out there. Is that on YouTube as well? Yes, it's basically the audio from my YouTube videos. And awesome. I sometimes interview atheists and host debates and stuff like that as well. Awesome. And it's also Robert L. White on YouTube. I'll include both those links in today's podcast show notes. Robert, it was really fun. I agree. Thank you so much for having me on. I might have to return the favor on my podcast. And thanks a lot. Thank you to Rob. Thank you to Dave Blair at DaveBlairMusic.com. Thank you to Feedspot.com for promoting the Right to Reason to the Top 10 Atheist podcast. Thank you to our patrons, Phil Calderone, Jason Parker, Freethinker215, Alan Marks, Philip Spawn, Bernard Lamberell, Enema Man, Larry Wilson, Brittany Catherman, Michael Moore, Catherine Klass, Rob Schreck, and our top supporter, Rob Montgomery. You can support this broadcast at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. All of the very talented music in today's episode was written and performed by our very own friend and patron, Michael Moore. You can find his new album at Apple Music. The name of the album is Belling the Tiger. I'll have the link in today's show notes. Next week, Christian apologist and author Caleb Jackson will be defending the resurrection of Christ against theist debater T-Jump. Between now and then, remember that you have the right to reason.